Hi, my name is Ron Parsons. I'm a midwife and a midwifery educator, and in this series I'll be demonstrating how to carry out a systematic examination of the newborn. The aim of the systematic examination is to screen for congenital abnormalities that might benefit from early intervention and to identify any concerns that require further tests, referrals or treatment. First, I would ensure that informed consent is obtained from the parent or legal guardian. I would clearly explain what the examination involves, its purpose, and reassure them that the process is routine and non-invasive. In line with the Children's Act 1989, consent should be given by someone with parental responsibility, usually the mother or the father if the parents are married. Before beginning the examination, I would ensure I wash my hands. I'll also clean the surface where the baby is being examined and check the room is warm, well lit, and quiet and private as possible. Postnatal wards can be busy environments, so creating a calm space helps both with the examination and with discussing any sensitive information. Next, I'll gather the necessary equipment, including a stethoscope, a tongue depressor, a light source, an ophthalmoscope, a tape measure, a thermometer, and a towel or blanket to keep the baby warm, and also a clean nappy. I'll ensure that the environment remains warm with the windows closed to maintain a neutral thermal setting throughout the examination. And before examining the baby, I need to review the notes to consider the maternal medical history, including chronic health problems such as diabetes, epilepsy, or medications required during pregnancy, which again could impact the newborn, such as SSRIs. I'll look at the obstetric history, so how many previous pregnancies, and whether there were any issues such as stillbirth, preterm birth, or congenital abnormalities with those children. The pregnancy, including whether it was full term, any antenatal scans indicating issues with fetal growth or infections, or any recorded breech presentation, and the type of delivery need to be considered. I'll look at blood tests, including Rh status, serology, infectious disease screening, and also social history, checking if the mother has support at home, any concerns with housing or mental health, and whether any safeguarding concerns are noted. I'll look at the family history, including genetic disorders, heart conditions, hip problems, or metabolic diseases, and also review the immediate postnatal period, including how the baby has been feeding, whether they've passed urine and meconium, and if there have been any concerns like jaundice or poor feeding. I will also ask the parents to reconfirm the history. Often parents' descriptions or understandings of health conditions may be inaccurate, or they may not think to mention them at booking, so it's important to have a fuller discussion as possible with them. I'll also ask the parents whether there have been any concerns. They will have done the first examination on their baby, and whether there is a family history of congenital heart disease or hip problems. And I'll do this before I move on to examining the baby. Following my review of the history and the notes, I will start my examination. The Shen is a somewhat opportunistic examination depending on the state of the baby, but for the purposes of this assessment, I will proceed through it systematically. And throughout, I will follow the standard structure of examinations: inspection, auscultation, palpation. The first step is to remove the infant's clothing, and as I'm doing so, I'm generally observing the baby, observing tone, posture, movements, colour, and any dysmorphic features. The first important thing to look at is thermoregulation. I'm going to palpate the body temperature and note any difference between the limbs and the trunk. I'm then going to take and document the baby's temperature with a thermometer underneath the arm. And it should be between 36.5 degrees Celsius and 37.5 degrees Celsius. Once I've confirmed the baby is maintaining its temperature, I'll then move on to the respiratory system. I'm going to initially observe the respiratory rate, which I will count for a full minute, and I'll also observe work of breathing. The respiratory rate should be between 40 to 60 breaths per minute, provided the baby is calm. I'll observe the baby for signs of increased work of breathing, including difficulty feeding, grunting, tracheal tug, chest recession, nasal flaring, abdominal breathing, head bobbing, and colour. I'll observe for a symmetrical chest wall expansion. Asymmetry may note a unilateral lung pathology, for example, a pneumothorax. Then I will gently palpate the chest for crepitus of the clavicles, the ribs, and the sternum. And I'll look for equal chest rise and palpate for equal chest rise. Then I'm going to auscultate each side of the chest in a symmetrical pattern, comparing side to side. Breath sounds should be vascular, meaning soft and low pitched. And I need to pay attention to the inspiratory and expiratory sounds at each placement. I'll note the quality and volume of each breath sound and any additional sounds such as a wheeze or coarse crackles. and I'll repeat auscultation on the posterior aspect of the chest. As I turn the infant over, I'm looking for normal ventral suspension also. Also clinically relevant would be pectus excavatum, a caved-in or sunken appearance of the chest. Following the assessment of the respiratory system, I can now move on to the cardiovascular system, starting with inspection. I need to assess if the baby is well perfused. If the baby has black or brown skin, like this baby, I need to consider how I do this. For example, observation of the mucous membranes in the mouth or pulse oximetry. I need to note the infant's activity level, any cyanosis, any polycythemia, any pallor, any mottling, and perfusion via capillary refill. To continue the assessment, I will place my hand on the chest to palpate any heaves or thrills and check for a point of maximal impulse, which also locates the heart and rules out dextrocardia. I'll also check the capillary refill, and then I'll auscultate the heart in the following locations: the aortic valve, the pulmonary valve, the mitral valve, and the tricuspid valve. I'm going to listen over each area with both the bell for low-pitched sounds and the diaphragm for high-pitched sounds. I'm listening for heart sound 1, which is the tricuspid and mitral valves closing, and sound 2, which is the aortic and pulmonary valves closing. What I'm listening for is turbulent blood flow, which indicates a heart murmur. I'll also note rate and rhythm. The normal heart rate of a newborn is approximately 80 to 160 beats per minute, depending on the infant's state. And I'll check preductal and postductal oxygen saturations. Both readings should be above 95% and within 3% of each other. I'm also going to check the femoral and brachial pulses. These should be equal rate, rhythm and strength. Absence or delay could indicate coarctation of the aorta, and a weak central pulse is indicative of poor cardiac output. Now we're going to move on to the head. First, I will observe the appearance. I'm looking for a round appearance and will note any dysmorphic features. I'll then measure head circumference to ascertain micro or macrocephaly. Normal head circumference would be between 31 and 38 centimetres. This infant has a head circumference of about 36 centimetres. I'll then palpate, and I'm going to palpate the anterior fontanelle, noting if it feels flat, which would be normal, or if it's sunken, bulging or abnormal. A tense bulging fontanelle may suggest raised intracranial pressure, and a sunken fontanelle may suggest dehydration. I'll palpate the vault, noting the cranial sutures if they're closely applied, widely separated or normal. Craniostyenosis is a condition in which one or more of the fibrous sutures in an infant's skull prematurely fuses, changing the growth pattern of the skull, which can result in raised intracranial pressures and damage to the intracranial structures. I will note any cranial moulding. This is common after birth and resolves in a few days. Caput succedaneum is a diffuse subcutaneous fluid collection with poorly defined margins that often crosses suture lines. This is caused by pressure on the presenting part of the head during delivery. It does not usually cause complications and resolves over the first few days. A cephalhematoma, however, is a subperiosteal hemorrhage. This occurs in 1 to 2% of infants and might increase in size after birth. The hemorrhage is bound by the periosteum, therefore the swelling does not cross suture lines, but it does increase the risk of jaundice. Next, I'll move on to examining the baby's face. I'll start by looking at the overall appearance, noting any dysmorphic features. I'll then check for facial symmetry. This can be caused by a facial nerve palsy, particularly after an instrumental delivery. I'll also look for any signs of trauma, such as bruising or lacerations, which could have happened around the time of delivery. I'm going to assess the nose, and I'll assess whether nasal passages appear patent. Because newborns are obligate nasal breathers, bilateral choanal atrasia can lead to respiratory distress and cyanosis when they're at rest. Finally, I'll have a look at the chin. It's normal for newborns to have a slightly receding chin, but if it's particularly pronounced, it might be associated with syndromes such as Pierre-Robin syndrome. Next, I'll move on to the eyes, and I'll start by looking at their overall position and shape, checking that there are 2 eyes present and that their size is appropriate in relation to the baby's head. I'll also make sure the corneas are clear, and I'll look for any signs of ptosis or epicanthic folds. Next, I'll check for any redness or discharge. I'll gently pull down the lower eyelid to examine the sclera and note any discoloration, such as jaundice. I'll also take a moment to look at the lashes and eyebrows. I'll then assess the fundal reflex in each eye. Using the ophthalmoscope, I'll shine the light towards the baby eye from about 6 inches away. I'm looking for a reddish-orange reflection in each pupil, which comes from light bouncing off the vascularized retina. The exact colour can vary depending on the baby's ethnicity. Any absent reflex or a white reflex known as leukochorea requires immediate referral to ophthalmology. Next, I'm going to inspect the ears. I'm going to look at the pinna, noting any asymmetry, any skin tags, any pits, or the presence of accessory auricles. I will look for a well-developed helix in line with the gestation, and the pinna should spring back when flexed. I'll also check that the outer canthus of the eye is in line with the top 1/3 of the ear or the posterior fontanelle. Low-set ears are associated with genetic conditions such as Turner's or Noonan syndrome. Next, I'll examine the baby's mouth, and I'll start by inspecting the entire palate. To do this properly, I'll use a tongue depressor and a torch, and I might ask the baby's parents to stabilise the baby's head. I want to visualise the whole palate and central uvula to check they're present and intact, and I must visually inspect, as it's highly possible to miss a cleft palate if it's only done by palpation. I'll also look at the tongue and gums, assessing for any signs of tongue tie, the presence of natal teeth, Epstein's pearls, which are small, harmless cysts commonly seen in newborns. If the tongue appears large or protruding, I'll keep in mind that this can be associated with conditions such as Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, Down syndrome, or hypothyroidism. Of course, if I don't have a pen torch, I can use the light on my ophthalmoscope. We've just examined the head and neck, and now we're moving on to the upper limbs themselves. Here we're going to inspect them, assessing them for symmetry. Both arms should be similar in size and length, and tone should be equal on both sides. If there's reduced movement or tone on one side, I'll consider possible causes such as nerve injuries from birth, like an Erb's palsy or a clavicular fracture. Then I'll examine the hands, counting all the fingers, checking for any webbing, polydactyly, or missing digits. I'll also look for parakinesia as well. I'll look at the palms to see whether the baby has the expected 2 palmar creases, and while I'm here, I'll also check the grasp reflex. I'm now going to move on to the gastrointestinal system. So the abdomen, I'm going to observe it for evidence of abdominal distension. Cause of this could include bowel obstruction, organomegaly, and ascites. I'll then inspect the umbilicus, noting any swelling, such as an umbilical hernia, any erythema, any discharge, for example, umbilical cord, stump cord infection, and I'll check for 2 arteries and a vein, remembering that a single artery is linked to renal malformations. I'll then auscultate for bowel sounds. Then I can palpate the abdomen to assess for organomegaly. The liver should be palpable no more than 2 centimetres below the costal margin. If it's palpable lower in the abdomen, we need to consider hepatomegaly. The spleen may be palpable at the left costal margin in healthy infants. If it's easily palpable, we need to consider splenomegaly. The kidneys are normally only palpable using deep bimanual palpation. If these are easily palpable, we need to consider polycystic kidney disease. Next, I'm going to examine the genitalia. First, I'm going to look for ambiguity of the genitalia. This can be a sign of certain conditions, most commonly congenital adrenal hyperplasia. In girls with CAH, the genitalia may appear viralized, whereas with boys, they'll typically have a normal external genitalia. If in examining a baby boy, which I am, I'll start by checking the position of the urethral meatus. An abnormal position can indicate conditions such as hypospadias or epispadias. I'll examine the size of the penis. Normally it should measure at least 2 centimetres in the newborn period. And I'll examine any swelling of the testes that might indicate a hydrocele. To tell if it's a hydrocele, the swelling will usually transilluminate when a light is shone through it. And finally, I'll palpate the scrotum to confirm that both testes are present. A single undescended testes is relatively common and can be monitored over time, but if neither testes is palpable, this is considered a disorder of sexual development and requires further investigations. Now I'll examine the lower limbs, and I'm going to start by inspecting the legs for any abnormalities. First, I'll check the symmetry. They should be equal in size and length. I'll look for any swelling or edema, which could sometimes indicate conditions like hypoalbuminemia, or less commonly in a newborn, congestive cardiac failure. In a newborn in heart failure, swelling usually appears around the eyes first. I'll also, like with the hands, check for any missing digits, extra digits, or webbing. I'll assess muscle tone in both legs. Tone can be decreased in conditions like Down syndrome or asymmetrically increased due to upper motor neuron lesions, such as a neonatal stroke or an intracranial hemorrhage. I'll observe movement in both legs as well, looking for any weakness that might suggest an underlying neurological problem or joint abnormality. I'll then test the reflexes, including the Babinski and the plantar reflexes on the feet. And finally, I'll assess ankle dorsiflexion to check for talipes, either positional or fixed. Normally, it's difficult on this doll. The ankle should fully flex. If it doesn't, it could indicate an abnormality of the talus bone in the foot. And then I'll move on to the back and spine. Ideally, we'd inspect the spine prior to the hips. This also gives us a good opportunity to assess the symmetry of the gluteal folds. I'm inspecting the spine for scoliosis, for hair tufts, nevi, birthmarks. Sacral pits are concerning if they're more than 3 centimetres away from the anus, because hair tufts and sacral pits can be associated with underlying neural tube defects, for example, spina bifida. I'll turn the baby back over, and this is when I would assess the hips. The Barlow and Ortolani test are carried out in the UK as part of the NIPE screening programme to detect hip instability and dislocation. In line with guidance, each hip should be examined individually. The Barlow test is used to screen for a dislocatable hip by attempting to dislocate it, whereas the Ortolani test is then used to confirm the positive finding, i.e. the hip is actually dislocated. There is an excellent video demonstrating these, which I will link in the comments. I'll inspect the anus for patency. Abnormal embryological development of the rectum can result in an imperforate anus. Meconium should be passed within 24 hours. A delay is suggestive of obstruction or Hirschsprung's disease. I'm then going to assess the neurological system. So the absence of several reflexes might indicate an underlying neurological abnormality. I'm going to start with the Moro reflex. So supporting the infant's upper back with one hand, I'm then going to drop the baby back once or twice into my other hand. A normal Moro reflex involves the extension of the legs and heads while the arms jerk upwards with the fingers extended. The arms are then brought together, the hands clench into fists, and the infant cries. Asymmetry may be due to hemiparesis, brachial plexus injury, or a fractured clavicle. There are many other reflexes we can check, which I won't demonstrate here as the doll has no ability to react. It's also important to assess tone. As we're doing the examination, we're going to be examining the baby, moving the baby's limbs, so we can pick up if this baby is hypertonic. Hypertonic infants are often described as feeling like a rag doll due to their floppiness. They often have difficulty feeding as their mouth muscles cannot maintain a proper suck-swallow pattern or a good breastfeeding latch. Finally, I'm going to inspect the skin. Obviously, I have been able to see the skin the whole time, but I'm now going to inspect for colour, looking for any pallor or ashen skin, depending on skin colour, any cyanosis, any erythema, any plethora, or any jaundice. I look for any bruising and lacerations, noting the size and location, because they may have been sustained during childbirth. I'll also note any hemangiomas, also known as strawberry marks. These are blood vessels which form a raised red lump on the skin, appearing soon after birth. They typically get bigger over the first 6 to 12 months and then shrink and disappear by the age of 7. They might require treatment depending on their location if they affect vision, breathing, or feeding. I will also note and discuss with the parents any peeling, any port wine stain, any slate grey nevus, milia, or erythema toxicum. These should be documented and measured if needed. It can be an important safeguarding concern where skin conditions may appear bruise-like. This completes the examination of the newborn, and as I have finished the assessment, I will share the results of the assessment with the parents, explaining the reason for any referrals or follow-up I feel are required. I'll also check if the parents have any further questions and provide education on relevant topics, and let them know this test will be repeated at 6 to 8 weeks by the GP. It's important that we document all findings and fill out the NIPE database and hand over a care plan to the midwives, either caring for the baby on the ward or at transfer into community. The care plan for the baby should be a team approach and involve paediatricians, hearing screeners, midwives and health visitors to improve outcomes and support a holistic approach. Thank you for watching. This series video covered the examination of the newborn. I hope you found it helpful. Please note that this is not an exhaustive list of every condition that could be screened for, and this is designed as a stepping stone for your learning.